Well, let's bring in our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, as well as our security and defence expert, Professor Michael Clarke. Dominic, Michael, thank you very much for being with us. Now, Dominic, you were in Ukraine at the time of Prigozhin's failed mutiny. What do you think will be the reaction there now to this news?
Yeah, and that was an extraordinary day. It was a day where the Ukrainians sort of allowed themselves to hope that Putin's misadventure in Ukraine could lead to Russians turning on themselves, and of course they were bitterly disappointed when it didn't. I think there's satisfaction in Ukraine that Prigozhin is likely to be dead, not just because of who he was, but because he brought thousands of Russian prisoners from prisons, evil men with terrible criminal records, to Ukraine to kill Ukrainians. He also kind of held the movement, the Wagner movement, together, which was a very effective fighting force, the most effective fighting force, really, the Russians have had in this war. And he kind of, I think, articulated some of the concerns the Russians had. So I think they'll be hopeful that his demise will lead to lower morale in the Russian army. But that's really only relevant, really, when the Russians are in attack, and they're not anymore, they're in defence. They're hunkered down in the Surovikin line, named after the general who today has been relieved of his duties because he's believed to have been too close to Prigozhin. And I think the Ukrainians know that the defences that he put in place, a lot of mines, concentric lines of defences, so far have been impregnable to their attempts to try and puncture through. And they're being expected by the West to do something which has not really been done in the history of war, which is to puncture through that with armour without the use of air power. So I think their concern is that, you know, he's gone, but the war seems to be heading towards possibly a stalemate, where Russians will have control of a lot of their country still, indefinitely. And he may be dead, but I think in their minds there are plenty more monsters where Prigozhin came from.
Yeah, certainly are. That counteroffensive hasn't had the effect that it's had, they wanted. And Michael, you've been looking at the Wagner social media channels. What are they saying may well be the future of that mercenary group?
Well, I mean, Wagner, the grey zone channels are very clear that the Prigozhin and Utkin are dead. There's also lots of stuff coming out. This has set off so many hairs, you can imagine. There's stuff coming out in the last hour that an Ilyushin 76 has landed in Belarus and is taking Wagner people out of Belarus. And that's also being confirmed by some of the Belarusian opposition groups who are more reliable in what they're looking at. Also, there's rumours that in Rostov, you remember Rostov in that apparent coup on the 24th of June?
They took.
I mean, Rostov was on fate when Prigozhin and the Wagner people left. People were cheering in the streets. Rostov, it is said, is in a state of ferment this evening. Now, that may turn out not to be true. We don't know. But there are all sorts of rumours kicking around, because this is like throwing a stone into the pond. You know, I mean, Prigozhin might have been very, very unpopular with the elite, as we were talking about before, but he had a lot of support among a lot of Russians because he seemed to speak the truth. He seemed to relate to people. I know he's a brutal man. I mean, he was the man who invented the sledgehammer as the symbol for Wagner, because that's how they killed their deserters, with a sledgehammer to the head. And he was very proud of that. He was a brutal man, but he had a certain sort of connection with a lot of ordinary Russians.